So if we head over to PCPartPicker.com, we can take a look at some of the components that we need to build when we do our system builder now. And hopefully you've taken a look at some of the build guides, maybe some of the completed builds, to get an idea of what people are putting together there. But if we click on the choose a CPU, we can see we have tons and tons of choices here. The way that this has worked is usually by popularity. So the ones at the top are pretty well, very popular. And you can see right now it's really dominated by AMD, with a couple Intels here and there inside. The prices are over on the side. And you hopefully did that earlier assignment on just looking at CPUs and the way that naming and a bit of the lines are done. But generally, if you look at, for instance, the AMD, you've got the Ryzen 5 as the mid-range, the Ryzen 7, the Ryzen 9 is kind of the top end, and the Ryzen 3 as the lower end builds, CPUs. And it depends on who you're building for. That's the biggest thing we can take away from this, is who is your audience for these. Now, say you want to compare exactly, well, how much of a difference do I get between these two? There are websites for computer benchmarking. There's lots of YouTube videos to compare what you get out of two different ones. Or say I wanted to compare an Intel i7 9700K to the Ryzen 5 3600X. You can use any of those sites to compare, especially different models, AMD versus Intel. And see where they're at, because if you look at the price difference between those two, we've got $307 to $539, and that's a significant price difference, which may have only a marginal increase on performance. So is that where you want to spend a lot of your money? So when you're picking your CPU, this is a pretty expensive portion of the PC that we're building here. This would be kind of a good place to start, is to look at, okay, how much do I want to spend? What do I want to build this? Who am I building this for? And if you click on any of them, you can see different retailers in Canada, kind of what their prices are. So for the assignment, you're also asked to list out the price to get a bit of an idea of what's going on from there. Now, any CPU is going to come with a stock cooler on there. So for now, I'm just going to leave off the CPU cooler. If we want to pick up something later on, we can. But what I want to do is I want to match a motherboard to the CPU that I purchased. So if I take a look, one of the most important things for me to do, and I think I can even check out by, you can sort by the different socket types, and you can see them here. So the socket type and the CPU need to match. That's kind of my first priority here. And what that means is the AMDs, especially the Ryzen lines, are going to be that AM4 build, where the Intels are primarily going to be that LGA 1151. And it can get more detailed than that. There can be specific versions, but that's where we're going to start with kind of our search. And once again, we're talking about popularity kind of at the top, and you can see the range in prices here. Now, at the base level, or at kind of what we're looking at as kind of the popular ones, we can look at, or what separates some of these out is, one, their size, right? So their form factor. If it's ATX, it's that longer one. It's that full size kind of motherboard. The micro ATX is going to be a bit smaller. Okay, a bit more compact. So you have to think, what space is this going into? Because your case is going to have to match. And you can buy a bigger case and put a smaller micro ATX board in there. There's not a problem with that. But you can't buy a small micro ATX case and then try to fit in a larger form factor motherboard. That just isn't going to work for it. So when you're looking, you're starting to think about, okay, what do I want for my case? What am I going to actually end up building or putting this in here? So I'm guessing for this build that you're asked to do, most of you are looking at ATX. You may look at micro ATX. It's not a big difference there. And now you're going to the features of some of these and what they are able to do. So you might look at the amount of USB ports. You might look at the number of RAM slots, the number of those DIMMs that you can put in. And is there Wi-Fi enabled on the motherboard, how many different slots for PCI Express do I have? Am I plugging in a lot of extra things? And you can see, like it has up here, a lot of the ones at the top are going to have kind of all the basics taken care of. So now you're just picking between, well, do I want some of those extra things? Do I want a board that can light up? Is that something I care about with lights and kind of those RGB colors? Or is it more, I'm not that particular about that. And that can help me kind of pick out which ones I'm thinking. And once again, you can see a lot of these are matched up as the same model number, that B450, especially at the top up here. So that's a very popular brand. You can see, okay, I want Wi-Fi enabled on my motherboard. My cost is going to go up. Okay. So you can buy additional Wi-Fi adapters, but they're going to take up a PCI slot, or they're going to take up a USB slot. So you can budget, you can kind of go, what is important to me? What do I want to be able to do? You might see, hey, this is a pretty cheap motherboard. I can get away. Well, I only have 2 memory slot channels. I have a max of 32 gigs, which right now is probably a lot for most people. But if you're doing something where, you know, I want to build this for the next few numbers of years, that might play a role into what you're doing with this and how far you can cap out. We can see even smaller boards, these mini ITX boards. And as you go down, you can get different models, different things to take a look at. So our next one, once we get the CPU sorted out, is our motherboard. And I usually connect that with our case. So now that I've got, okay, if I have an ATX case, I can either do a full or a mid tower, just to make sure that it's going to be able to fit inside. And especially if you're doing a newer build, I almost suggest picking, if you've got the room for it, a bigger case, just to make sure you're not going to run into any issues with space and with kind of moving your cables and moving everything around. And this is now, when we're looking at case, you get a bit of form and function of what do you want it to look like? Is there a particular color you want? Is there kind of an overlay that you want? As well as, like, what do you want on your front panel? On the NZXT cases, we've got one USB, I believe 3.0 on the front, as well as a USB-C type, and one headphone microphone jack and a power supply. Do I want specific lights already kind of inside? You can look up reviews of cases online. They can tell you about the airflow, which is another big one. But once again, anything kind of at the top here are the most popular ones. You can look at the number of bays. The side panel, do you want it as kind of acrylic, or do you want glass, tempered glass? What interests you and kind of the way that it's going to look here. And yeah, so for the beginnings here, our CPU, our motherboard, our case are pretty good standard ways to look at when you're purchasing for that gaming PC.